All right, I thought I would go through the chapter review evens. Maybe that will help you prepare for the test. Tell you a quick story first. I know some of you are big fans of my purebred idiot dog. Well, for Mother's Day, I bought my wife some very expensive chocolates from Sweetlands, and I gave them to my wife on Saturday night, and so she had one or two, and then she left them in our living room. And in the middle of the night, the dog went up and grabbed that bag and ate every chocolate in the bag. Like quite a bit of money worth of chocolate. And I was hoping the dog would die. She acted sick, but she didn't die. But life is full of disappointments. All right, let's go over your chapter review now. Hopefully it wasn't as disappointing. I started at number 2, so I thought I'd record it. All right, so we had, here's 2 points, find the distance between them. 64 minus 55 is 9, 9 squared is 81. This is a distance formula, of course. 90 minus 50 is 40, 40 squared is 1600. So you get the distance as the square root of 1681, which is about, which is 41. Oops. Sorry. Put a y in instead of a 1. 41. Okay, number 4. Give the coordinates of the midpoint. So to find the midpoint, you take, so here's your point. Sorry, put them down first. Okay, to find the midpoint, you take the x's divided by 2, comma, the y's divided by 2. Okay, so negative 3 plus 6 is 3. 3 over 2 is 1.5. 2 plus negative 2 is 0. 0 over 2 is 0. There's your midpoint. Oh, sorry, misread it. It's positive 3. Sorry, so that's 9. 9 divided by 2 is 4.5. 4.5. Sorry about that. Okay, number 6. What are the coordinates of the midpoints of the sides? Sorry, you have a triangle with vertices 3, 2, 3, 7, and 6, 11. What are the coordinates of the midpoints of its sides? So this one, you're going to have 3 plus 3 over 2, comma, 2 plus 7 over 2. Then you're going to have 3 plus 6 over 2, comma, 7 plus 11 over 2. And then 3 plus 6 over 2, 2 plus 11 over 2. So 6 over 2 is 3. 9 over 2 is 4.5. Then 9 over 2 is 4.5. 18 over 2 is 9. And then 9 over 2 is 4.5. And 13 over 2 is 6.5. There are your midpoints. Number 8. If M is the midpoint of AO, give the coordinates of M. Sorry, yeah, AO. So the point A is at XY. Point O is at 0, 0. And so you're going to have x plus 0 over 2, y plus 0 over 2. So x over 2, y over 2. Number 14. Draw a coordinate system and plot the points. 0, 12, negative 5. So draw a 3D graph like so. And the point is 0, 12, negative 5. So 0, and then 12 in the y direction. Let's count by twos. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. And then down 5. 2, 4, 6. So we'll call this here. So 0 in the x direction, 12 in the y, 5 in the z. 5 down the z. Okay, number 16. Says 2 points are given. Find the coordinates of the midpoint of the segment, joining them. Find the distance between them. All right, so we got R, 13, negative 5, 8, and S, 0, 16, negative 3. So for the midpoint, 13 plus 0 over 2, negative 5 plus 16 over 2, 8 plus negative 3 over 2. So 13 over 2 is 6.5. Negative 5 plus 16 is 11 over 2 is 5.5. And 8 plus negative 3 is 5 over 2 is 2.5. Then for part B, the distance. So got 13 minus 0 squared plus 16 minus a negative 5, careful the negative, squared, and 8 minus a negative 3. So 169 plus, so that's 21 squared, 441, plus 11 squared is 121. So I got about 27.04. All right, 18. You saw the statements. What, if anything, can you conclude? What laws or reasoning have you used? If corresponding angles formed by a transversal are congruent, then two lines are parallel. If alternate angles formed by a transversal are congruent, then so are corresponding angles. So you've got corresponding angles congruent. We'll call that statement C. And then you have parallel lines. We'll call that statement P. And then you have, if alternate interior angles formed by a transversal are congruent. So you've got alternate interior angles congruent. We'll call that statement A. And then you have, so are corresponding angles. In other words, corresponding angles are congruent. Oh, we already have that. So let's look at the statements then. So we have, if C is true, then P. Then our second statement says, if A is true, then C. So now we can use the law of transitivity here to say A implies P, which is if alternate interior angles are congruent, then the lines are parallel. So, like I said, law of transitivity. 20. If L is perpendicular to M and then A is 90, measure of A is 75. We can conclude that L is not perpendicular to M. Because A is not 90. So that's just, yeah. Might want to have your book open for some of them. Number 22. Solving 2x minus 5 and blah, blah, blah. What should L conclude? Well, if she did her algebra correctly, the equation has no solution. And that's by the law of indirect reasoning. So no solution. Okay. 24. If a figure is a rectangle, then it's a square. Write the converse, inverse, contrapositive, which are true. So converse, if a figure is a square, then it's a rectangle. So is that true? Yes. Because the original statement, if a figure is a rectangle, then it's a square, that's not true. But this is true. If a figure is a square, then it has to be a rectangle. Then it says write the inverse. This is the inverse. If a figure is not a rectangle, then it's not a square. So if a figure is not a rectangle, then it's not a square. And that's also true because it can't be a square if it's not a rectangle. So C, contrapositive. If a figure is not a square, then it's not a rectangle. And this is just the original statement we said was false. And so the contrapositive and the original conditional are always the same. So this is also false. Because obviously you could make a figure that's not a square. You could make a rectangle that is not a square, right? So you could draw this. There you go. Here's a rectangle that's not a square. But that's a rectangle. So false. Moving on. 26. Use the figure at the right. If the measure of ABC is 40, then the measure of DBC is 140. We're supposed to write converse, inverse, contrapositive. So converse, if the measure of angle DBC is 140, then the measure of angle ABC is 40. And that's true because they're a linear pair. So B, inverse, if the measure of angle ABC is not 40, then the measure of angle DBC is not 140. And that's also true. Letter C. If the measure of angle DB, this is the contrapositive, by the way. DBC is not 140, then the measure of angle ABC is not 40. And that is also true. So they're all true. 28. Give an indirect proof to show that the square root of 22 for blah, 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 is not blah, 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 blah. All right. I'm not really given anything here. So I guess we'll say we will show the square root of 2400 is not equal to 49 using a proof by contradiction. Assume the square root of 2400 does equal 49. 49 squared is 2401. Since 2401 is not equal to 2400, the square root of 2400 does not equal 49. Sorry. Yeah, this is kind of a silly short indirect proof. So our assumption that the square root of 2400, equals 49 is false. Therefore, the square root of 2400 is not equal to 49. We're moving on. 30. Use a figure below. Write an indirect proof to show that triangle ABC is not isosceles. So you'll have to look for the figure in the book. So we are given triangle ABC, and we will show triangle ABC is not isosceles using sorry, I wish I could write faster. So we're going to assume triangle ABC is isosceles. So by definition, triangle ABC has at least two equal sides. So we use the distance formula here. So let's look at the distance between A and B is 11 minus 10 squared plus 12 minus 0 squared. So 11 minus 10 is 1 squared is 1 plus 145. Sorry, 144 is 145. All right, let's look at the distance from A to C. So 11 minus 0 squared plus 12 minus 8 squared. So that's 121 and 16, which is the square root of 137. And then BC, 10 minus 0 squared plus 8 minus 0 squared. So that would be 100 plus 64. So obviously none of those are equal. So here is our contradiction. Square root of 145 not equal to the square root of 137, not equal to the square root of 164. Okay, so then we say, thus our assumption that triangle ABC is isosceles is false. Therefore, triangle ABC is scalene, which means not isosceles. So make sure you follow this pattern when you're doing an indirect proof. All right, 32, difference between direct and indirect proof. A direct proof begins with information you know is true, that's the given. And then you just use your theorems, postulates, etc. to get to a conclusion. In an indirect proof, you assume the negation, and then you show that there's a contradiction. So you can fill that out. All right, 34. It says, use coordinate geometry to deduce properties and figures and prove theorems. Prove that the triangle with vertices Q0, 0Q, and 2Q, 3Q is a right triangle. So there's a couple ways to do this. So if we kind of draw a picture here. So you've got Q0, so we'll just say here, Q0. And then 0Q, so up here, 0Q. And then 2Q, 3Q, so double, should have made this longer. Should have made this taller. Doesn't look bad, does it? So here would be 2Q, that's Q, this is 2Q. And then if this is Q, 1Q, 2Q, let's call it 3Q. All right, so here's my triangle, approximately. Now it says prove it's a right triangle. So you could do this a couple different ways. You could use the distance formula and do a squared plus b squared c squared. This obviously is your longest side. So maybe you did it that way. So then you would have, is that messy? If you do like 2q minus q squared plus 3q minus 0 squared. How messy is that? So 2q minus q is q, that'd be q squared. And then 3q, that'd be 9q squared. 9q squared. So the square root of 10q squared. That could be kind of messy. So I guess let's follow through. So q minus 0 is q squared, and q minus 0 is q squared. So you get the square root of 2q squared. And then the other side is 2q minus 0. So 2q squared plus 3q minus q is 2q squared again. And that's going to be 4q squared plus 4q squared equals 8q squared. Because this squared got to go on both. All right, so the question is, if you take the square root of 2q squared plus the square root of 8q squared, squared, you get the square root of 10q squared, squared. So the cool thing here is that the squareds and the square root signs will cancel. So you get 2q squared plus 8q squared is 10q squared. And that, of course, works out. So there you go, Pythagorean theorem. The other way to do this is to use slope and show that the slopes are the product of these slopes are -1. So if you do change in y over change in x here, you get 2q over 2q, which is 1. If you do this line, change in y over change in x, you get q over -q, which is -1. And 1 times -1 is -1. Since the product of the slopes is -1, it must be 90 degrees. So then it must be a right triangle. Two different ways to do that one. Okay, 40. Given the statements, what, if anything, can you conclude using the rule of logic? Either Mary is too old for camp or she can go to camp. Mary cannot go to camp. So Mary is too old for camp. Right, because it says she's either too old for camp or she can go to camp. So one of those two must be true. She can't go to camp, which must mean she's too old for camp. Oh, shoot. No, you don't have to do 42. 44. Nobody who really appreciates Beethoven fails to keep silent while the Moonlight Sonata is being played. Maybe I should be playing the Moonlight Sonata. I bet some of you can play the Moonlight Sonata. All 3 movements. That's on my goal list. I'm not there yet. Guinea pigs are hopelessly ignorant of music. No one who is hopelessly ignorant of music ever keeps silent while the Moonlight Sonata is being played. All right, so let's look at the 3 statements. Nobody who really appreciates Beethoven fails to keep silent while the Moonlight Sonata is being played. So if you appreciate Beethoven, then you keep silent. So appreciate Beethoven means you stay silent. Guinea pigs are hopelessly ignorant of music. So if you're a guinea pig, you are ignorant of music. No one who is hopelessly ignorant of music ever keeps silent while the Moonlight Sonata is being played. So if you are hopelessly ignorant of music, that implies you don't keep silence when the Moonlight Sonata is being played. All right, so let's see what we can do with the laws of logic. So transitivity is going to give me guinea pigs are not silent. Guinea pigs, okay, so that takes care of these 2. And so then I got to combine these. And so I'm going to use the law of contrapositive here to flip this around. So S implies not G. So B implies S implies not G. So B implies not G. So that will have all the statements. So what does that mean? If you appreciate Beethoven, you're not a guinea pig. Or you could say, contrapositive, if you're a guinea pig, you don't appreciate Beethoven. So we'll just say it that way. Guinea pigs don't appreciate, sorry, butchered that. Appreciate Beethoven. My favorite Beethoven piece is actually his 7th Symphony. So if you're thinking, what can I do today? Listen to Beethoven's 7th. I love it. Okay, 46. A ship is located 2.3 kilometers south and 1.4 kilometers west of a lighthouse. Another ship is 1.6 kilometers south and 0.8 kilometers east. Draw a picture. Oakley dokley. So, just going to put on a graph of sorts. So if your lighthouse is here at 0, 0, 2.3 kilometers south, so let's say 2.3, and 1.4 kilometers west. So we'll say this is east, this is west, north, south. So 2.3 and then 1.4. So just kind of eyeballing here. And then another ship is 1.6 kilometers south and 0.8 kilometers east. So here. All right, calculate the distance. So the one is negative 1.4, negative 2.3. And the other one is 0.8, negative 1.6. Okay, so distance, negative 1.4 plus, minus 0.8 squared plus negative 2.3 minus a negative 1.6 squared. All right, so negative 1.4 minus 0.8 is negative 2.2 squared. Negative 2.3 plus 1.6 is positive 0.7 squared. So that's going to be, let's do this. I'm just worry about those tricky negative signs. So approximately 2.31 miles. Oh, kilometers. Sorry. Yeah, just be careful with it. Remember in your calculator, you got to do that. Okay. 48. A wooden crate is 45 by 30 by 80. What is the length of the longest straw that will fit in it? So basically, you're just doing the 3D distance formula as if the other point was 0, 0, 0. So you're saying the one point is 45, 30, 80, whatever order you want, and the other point 0, 0, 0, then use the 3D distance formula. So you get 45 squared plus 80 squared plus 30 squared. So that's 96.57. That's in millimeters. Just millimeters, sorry. Okay, and then number 50, almost done. Write an equation for the circle below. So it's got a center of 4, 5, and then the radius is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You can see that because the distance from 4, 5 to 4, negative 1 is 6. And that's on the circle. So the equation for the circle is x minus h squared plus y minus k squared, and that's r squared equals. So we get 36 equals x minus 4 squared plus y minus 5 squared. And then 54. Find the center and the radius of the sphere. So we're given this. All right, so the radius is 2, right? Because this is the radius squared. Then the center is, so 1. And so this is obviously y minus a negative 2. So negative 2 and then 5. Okay, if you have any questions, let me know. Hopefully that was helpful. I have no idea. But if you didn't know how to do some of them and you're bipping through the chapter review, you can check any of the problems. So